Chapter 8 of Ezekiel for today. That's what's up next as we go through the major prophets in a year. We are looking at a series of visions in this section. Chapters 8 through 11 are a series of visions that's really explaining why the wrath of God is coming. So he is making clear to them why this wrath is going to fall upon them. What we see today is a vision of abominations, the wickedness that's right in the temple itself. Chapter 9, we're going to see visions of slayings in the city, what's coming. Chapter 10, visions of the burning of the city. And chapter 11, visions of the departure of God's glory, his Shekinah glory that fills the temple. Must have been really amazing to see that when it was in the temple itself. And then Ezekiel sees this vision of the Shekinah glory of the Lord departing, not to return until the Messiah comes back. So that's what we see here in chapters 8 to 11. And today in chapter 8, we see this vision of idols right in the temple. So in verses 1 through 4, as we divide this chapter up into bite-sized pieces, chapters 1 through 4, we see the vision itself. Verses 5 through 6, we see idols. 7 through 13, the elders. 14 and 15, the women. 16 and 17, the men. Finally, it closes on a somber note, the wrath. Let's look at the vision. Verse 1 is one of these 13 anchors. I think I've spoken about this in the book of Ezekiel. You know, Jeremiah was interesting because he organized his prophecy thematically, not chronologically. But Ezekiel gives us really firm anchors in history. And this is one of them. He's seeing these visions from chapters 8 through 11 were revealed to him on the 17th of September in 592. So this is about 4 years before the exile, the siege of Jerusalem and the fall of the city. Verse 2 is another one of these incredible visions that Ezekiel has. Fire, a person that looks like glowing, looks like they're on fire. This may be what's called a Christophany, which is a pre-incarnate vision of Christ revealing God. Thing to notice about this is again evidence that God has not abandoned his people. Again, Ezekiel is physically in Babylon, but the Lord appears to him there, and he's going to appear to him and tell him what's going on in Jerusalem. So what we're talking about here is the omnipresence of God, that he is with them in exile and he's with them in the city. It's also his omniscience, that he knows what's going on. Even though they're trying to hide their idolatry from him, it's impossible because he knows what's going on. As you go through this section too, take note of that idol of jealousy, or an idol that provokes the jealousy. This is again an allusion to the idol or the idols that are right in the Lord's temple with him. This is what that is an allusion to there. Verses 5 and 6 then talks about the idols themselves. Let's take a look at that. It says, "Then he said to me, Son of man, raise your eyes now to the north. So I raised my eyes toward the north, and behold, to the north of the altar gate was the idol of jealousy at the entrance. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The great abominations which the house of Israel are committing here, so that I would be far from my sanctuary. But yet you will see still greater abominations." So God reveals in this vision the worship of idols that's even going on in his sanctuary. Notice throughout this chapter that the anchor is the sanctuary, and it's either inside, underneath, someplace around the sanctuary that all this is going on. He's making Ezekiel aware and at the same time letting everyone know that he sees what's happening. Could you imagine the reception of this message in Jerusalem when they heard that what they thought was hiding, or what they thought was maybe acceptable to God, or what they thought was God wasn't noticing, he was noticing, and he was going to hold them accountable for it. We see the pervasiveness of this idolatry then in these next sets of verses. Verses 7 through 13 talks about the elders. This is the first of three groups showing how pervasive this idolatry is. And the elders themselves, these are the leaders of the city, the leaders of the nation. They thought that they had been so hidden. It appears that they are somewhere deep under the temple. It seems like they think that they are so hidden that God won't see them. But verses 11 through 13 of this section make it clear that this secret cult of Israel's elders worshiping pagan gods is not hidden at all from God. They're worshiping things God has created and not the Creator himself. It's kind of an echo of Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 20 or 21. You might want to take a look at that, write that down as soon as you're done reading this chapter today. Goes on then in verses 14 to 15 to talk about idolatry among the women of the city. And again, notice how this is centered around the temple. This was supposed to be the center of Israel's worship of God alone. And by the way, it will be in the future when the Messiah comes. But right now, at this point of Israel's history, in this period of the first temple, it's become a center of polluted and syncretistic worship. Tammuz, which is mentioned here, is a Babylonian god, the god of the cycle of planting and reaping and harvesting. The idea was that at the end of the harvest, when the land was, fall comes, the land lies fallow. It's as if Tammuz has temporarily died and she's going to be resurrected again. That's why the women are mourning over the death of Tammuz. Shows that they've really bought into this cult. It's not accidental, it's intentional to show, I think, that it's the women that are worshiping. And we see this pattern all the time in the Bible, that when the men abandon the worship of the true God, women are left defenseless. Men are to protect women from idolatry, they're to protect women from going astray. But when the men go astray, the women are left with defenseless, and they're open to enticement to sin, which is what we see here. Think Genesis chapter 3, where Eve is tempted by the serpent and Adam is there with her. Adam never speaks up. He never intervenes. Adam, who heard God's word directly, never cautions Eve or rebukes the serpent, but he stands by silently. And when men do that, women are led into idolatry. Women are led astray. But not only that, when the men of leadership are led astray, not only are women sent astray, but also the men that they lead are led astray themselves. And that's what we see in verses 16 through 17. We see that the failure of the elders spreads. It spreads throughout Israel, spreads to the men, spreads to the women. And this is judgment. It's not only a reason for judgment, but it is a manifestation of judgment when it falls upon people. In this case, they become sun worshipers. They're worshiping the sun. Maybe an allusion here to the god of Egypt. Remember, I think during the section that we were going through in Jeremiah, I pointed out that the reason that God did not want his people Israel to enter into geopolitical alliances with the nations around them was that part of that alliance, part of that agreement making would be to worship the gods of these allied nations. So in Jeremiah, we saw Israel making deals with Egypt, and here we see what I think is the worship of Egypt's sun god. Notice that number 25 as well. It's put in here for a reason. God's word is inerrant, so every jot and tittle is there for a purpose. 25 may be representing or the leaders of each of the Levitic groups. There were 24 groups of priests that kind of rotated through service in the temple over a period of time, plus the high priest. So we saw the elders, we see the people, and now we see the priests. The men are being led astray. Interesting phrase here in verse 7, this twig on their nose. They are putting the twig to their nose. Not sure exactly what that means. Scholars are divided on that. I will tell you that in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, what we call the Septuagint, they rendered it here, they are as mockers. So this is kind of some kind of mocking gesture toward God, some irreverent action toward him. We might think of it, it's kind of maybe coarse, but we might think of it as equivalent to flipping God off. They are some irreverent motion or action toward him. Verse 18 closes then on a somber note, as I said, with this coming judgment of God. Therefore I indeed will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not listen to them. God's turned his back on his people. Brothers and sisters, for the church age, let us learn today that the same omniscient and omnipresent God that was with Israel is with us. It's a comfort, and it's also a terror, that everything we say, that everything we do is laid bare before the Lord. And not only everything we say and do, but even our motive, our desire, our intent is plain before him. So brothers and sisters, pray as I pray through the day, and my quiet times in the morning is pray that God would create in me a clean heart, that he would find my heart and my hands acceptable in his sight. May you also find God to be available to you, and may you also pray to him that he would purify not only your intentions but your actions. God bless you, brothers and sisters. Hope you're having just a great time in Ezekiel. You know, I really like the major prophets. I've said that before. They're always a source of edification, encouragement, and challenge to me as every time I go through them. And I hope you're finding them the same way. And I hope you're finding things that you want to go back and look at more closely. So God bless you, and God bless your study of the major prophets.